Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And this is a particularly juicy and interesting one. We're going to be talking about Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. Oh, God, I love Scheherazade. We all love Scheherazade, don't we? I mean, is there anyone who doesn't love Scheherazade? I don't want to know. It will absolutely destroy my faith in humanity if someone says they don't like Scheherazade. Anyway, the history of Scheherazade in terms of its reference recording status is a very, very interesting one because it tells us something about what the history of the work is on disc and also how consensus emerges. Now, I pride myself in having, followed criticism over the past 4 or 5 decades in multiple languages, principally English, French, and German, and, a couple others as well. And for a while, I even wrote for a Japanese magazine, so which was translated, not always that well. So I did get a sense of how the criticism was running and what the great recordings were. And there are so many fine versions of Scheherazade. I mean, there's Markevich and Monteux, and there's Reiner, and there's Beecham, and there's, just a bazillion of them, right? However, and I'm going to use as my example the English-speaking world, although the rest of the universe kind of fell into shape as well. Similarly, I mean, because there was Ansermet doing it a zillion times as well in France, and, Okay, so back in the day, in like the 60s, and we're talking about stereo recordings, there were 2 reference recordings, depending on where you were. If you were in the UK, and maybe elsewhere as well, it was Beecham with the Royal Phil. Now, Beecham with the Royal Phil featured wonderful solo work, some slovenly playing here and there from the Royal Phil, and really sub-fusc sonics. I mean, there was no bass whatsoever. It's not a very good recording sonically, but that didn't matter. And it particularly didn't matter to the English critics who would talk about this recording as if it were their best friend, particularly the woodwind solos. I mean, there was, Reginald Bridge Cottage on clarinet and Trevor Thruckwhistle on bassoon, and he was so lovely. And I just remember good old Trevor playing the clarinet, and Thomas Beecham just smiling at everybody, and it was just a schmooze fest. And it was a schmooze fest that, for all the excellence of the wonderful wind soloists, and they were marvelous, I mean, don't get me wrong, was not supported by the audible sonic results, which were kind of a letdown. But nonetheless, this was the reference recording in the UK in like the 60s and 70s in that period of time. Now, in the United States, on the other hand, and in other not United States places outside of England, largely, one of the major reference recordings was Reiner's in Chicago, stunningly recorded by RCA, fabulously well played by Reiner. It was poo-pooed in some circles as being, one of those versions which was, varnished and slick and technically superb, but emotionally lacking. And let's face it, I mean, Scheherazade isn't the most emotional piece of music in the world anyway. I mean, Rimsky was not a Tchaikovsky. He was not a hot and heavy emoter. But that's not the point. The point is the Reiner was out there. It was stunning. It had all of the things that the Beecham didn't. And so people criticized it on the basis of being suspicious of technical excellence, which I always think is just the dumbest position to take. And also its, emotional effect, which of course is a personal thing, and I get it. And the fact that, they weren't friends with the woodwind section. Anyway, so those were the 2. Those were the 2 poles of Scheherazades. And sort of hovering on the fringes, there were the French people. I love the Ansermet recording, for example, at the Paris Conservatoire Orchestra. I mean, I love it. It's fabulous. But it was nobody's reference recording, even in France, I don't think. That's where the Scheherazade sweepstakes was until our reference recording popped up, and that was Kondrashin's with the Concertgebouw. Now, Now, let me see. When was this recorded? 1980. 1980. Yeah, it was really very timely, actually, because the 60s and 70s, we had Scheherazade covered, more or less, didn't we? With Beecham and Reiner. Well, in 1980, this showed up, and it practically set a new standard. The only thing wrong with this one is that there isn't a big tam-tam crash when the ship goes to pieces, because the Concertgebouw had this sort of strange instrument at the time that didn't do anything. But that's another issue. Was stunningly played, fabulously recorded. It had wind players as good as Beecham. It had orchestral discipline as snappy as Reiner had in Chicago. And it was a Russian guy conducting it. Oh, wow, that's a bonus, isn't it? Because the truth of the matter is that Kondrashin had the sympathy vote as well. Remember, he defected to the West and wound up in Amsterdam. And then he had a heart attack and dropped dead, after a performance of Mahler's First Symphony. I mean, just really very, very short time afterwards, which was a terrible loss to music because he was an absolutely wonderful conductor. He made very few studio recordings of the West. As a result, there's the Dvorak New World Symphony. There was this, and I think that's it. Philips released a whole Kondrashin Concertgebouw edition based on radio broadcast recordings, some of which were very good and some of which were not, as you might expect. It'd be nice to sort of see that stuff pop up again. But anyway, so Kondrashin had a lot of cachet, and he was neutral. He was in Amsterdam. Yeah, so I mean, in good old Holland, in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, where you couldn't, it didn't matter whether you were American or British or French or all those nationalisms and the politics and all that stuff. It kind of went out the window when people were dealing with the Netherlands, because it was a small country that didn't take sides. The only place where Kondrashin wasn't getting the sympathy vote was in Russia, of course, because it was the Soviet Union and he had defected, which meant that his whole life and career were persona non grata for a while. Anyway, so this Scheherazade came out. You have Hermann Krebers, the amazing Concertgebouw concertmaster, who is just fabulous. And this particular Phillips coupling I love, because you've got the Igor Markevich Russian Easter Overture and Capriccio Espagnol, which are also just like stunningly amazing. It's a great, great disc. But originally it was just a Phillips disc, had a beautiful white cover with, an Arabian themed thing. It was just beautifully made, beautifully done, a class project all the way, and a performance that was easily up there with the best, and like I said, it was not subject to the parochial kind of, preferences and prejudices that you so often see in the universe of music criticism, and everything else for that matter, and the arts generally. So yeah, this was the new reference edition, and it still is. It still is. All these years later, there have been billions and billions of Scheherazades flopping around, but this still has held its own as the reference recording for gorgeousness of wind playing, fabulous corporate ensemble, excellent, smart conducting by a Russian, idiomatic Russian guy. I mean, really, how is it going to get better? The only thing that could make it better would be a tam-tam when the ship cracks up at the end. But even so, an amazing performance and a wonderful way, as with all these reference recordings, to triangulate, to get your bearings on the work, and to make comparisons with other recordings of the work. So there you have it, my friends. The amazing Scheherazade. Doesn't have to be your favorite. Does not. It's okay. I mean, I kind of prefer the Paris Conservatory Orchestra. That's me. But it's great. It's unabashedly great, and a perfect recommendation for your first Scheherazade if you don't have one, and to get to know the work. And that's what a reference recording is supposed to do. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.